Good afternoon. My name is John Quigley. I am the President and CEO of the Elmhurst Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and I'd like to welcome you and members from a dozen or so chambers out here today for creating a powerful small business brand presentation at our multi-chamber luncheon and business expo. Please give the Carlisle a nice round of applause for hosting us today. I don't know if you know what the third Wednesday of October represents. It happens to be Support Your Local Chamber of Commerce Day. So it's no more fitting a day that we gather to present and share and network and do all the kinds of things that chambers of commerce are good at doing, and doing that for small local businesses. And that's the lifeblood of America. Small businesses employ nearly 50% of the people in this country. And when times get tough, small businesses don't dump their employees. Small businesses find a way to stay open, to survive, and to keep their employees employed. And that is what makes this country great. It's small businesses, not corporate America. And so this is the perfect day to celebrate chambers of commerce who are built around small businesses. At this time, I would ask you to bow your heads, take 20 seconds, and give your own silent prayer. Thank you. We are ready for lunch, and we'll be back about 12:30 with the presentation.
Good afternoon. Community Bank of Elmhurst, twice named the Business of the Year by the Elmhurst Chamber, is most pleased to present and be the presenting sponsor of today's multi-chamber event featuring Jim Paglia of Brands That Stand. My name is Ken Bartels, and I'm a Director and Senior Vice President of the Community Bank of Elmhurst and an Elmhurst Chamber Board member. Brands That Stand's website states, and I quote, "We are not a marketing agency. We aim to help you manage your brand through periodic counsel, not an agency-like relationship. A brand is much more about how you behave than what you say." Unquote. Ins and Outs LLC was created in 1995 by Paglia, and in 2015, the firm also began identifying as Brands That Stand to better reflect the work that revolves around providing counsel relating to brand alignment and organizational behavior and facilitation. But the scope of that work ranges from one-to-one CEO counsel to managing a network of hundreds of associates and service providers who support their clients. Jim Paglia has served as president and/or chairman of more than 30 not-for-profits over the past 3 decades, including chairman of the board for the Chicago 1994 World Cup of Soccer and as chairman of the board for the Illinois chapter of the March of Dimes. An author, lecturer, and teacher, he shares himself and his drive, his passion, and his expertise, while being also a most friendly and approachable human being. So please join me at this time in welcoming him and anticipating his remarks, Jim Paglia.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate that very much. I want to start by thanking this bank. You guys have been great friends over the years, so thank you very much. I also would like to start out by asking you if you know what it means to be a brand that stands. If you don't, then I'm going to give you a little bit of insight. You must stand for something special, something distinctive. You must stand apart. I don't care who you think your competition is, you must stand apart. And most importantly, you must stand the test of time. If you don't do those three things, you don't have a brand. You are most likely a commodity. I'm going to stop right there. I want to make a point. I've been up here for just a few seconds. You've already formed your impressions about me. The way our minds work is that we form impressions about things that we see within the first 3 to 7 seconds. That's how our brains work. And it's based on the fact that we have this fight or flight mentality that goes back to prehistoric times. And then we ask ourselves, are they friends or are they foe? And so you've decided already whether you like me or not, and it's based on a lot of factors. You might not like the way I'm dressed. You might say, oh, he's old, he's bald, he's fat, he's all kinds of stuff. I don't like the tone of his voice. Or you might say, I like him, he reminds me of my uncle. Or I have a brother like him, or so on and so forth. My point is, you've already made up your minds based on the first impression. My job as a brand person is to create an experience for you that influences the decision you've already made. If you've decided you don't like me, my job as a brand person is to try to convince you there is something redeemable. If you have decided otherwise, okay, then I'm going to try to advance that belief. I hope that makes sense to you. I'd like to do a little bit of a test with you, and I'm going to need some volunteers to help me do it. Could I ask the people at this table right in front of me if you would be willing to cooperate? Will you all play in this game with me? Simple, raise your hands if you're in. All right, you're going to do it. So this is what I refer to as the toothpaste game. And the way it works is I'm going to ask you to express things to me in specific categories as fast as you can without stopping until I tell you to stop. Okay? So, sir, I'm going to start with you. I would like you to name toothpaste brands as fast as you can, as loud as you can, until I ask you to stop. Stop. The next gentleman, I would like you to name luxury automobiles as fast as you can. Don't stop until I tell you to. Luxury automobiles, nice and loud. Stop. This lady in the front, would you name breakfast cereals for me as fast as you can until I ask you to stop? Stop. You said Raisin Bran, Cheerio. Okay. Let's do television stations as fast as you can until I ask you to stop. Stop. All right. So what happened? They all did exactly what our brains are programmed to do. And what our brains do is they keep things in categories of 3 or fewer. Everything you collect in your world, you keep in a group of 3 or fewer. So when I asked you to name toothpaste, after you said the third one, you hesitated, you looked up at the ceiling, and you fired off a fourth. When you moved your eyes away, it told me you did what we refer to as shifting the shelf. You moved to a different type of toothpaste. When we were talking about luxury cars, you actually said when you said this after the second car. And so my point to you is that is another way of shifting shelves. And the way we do this sometimes is that, we'll use the luxury automobile as an example again. I've often used that example with people, and I ask them to share with me luxury cars, and they will say things like Maserati, Rolls-Royce, Lexus. Do you see the disconnect there? Do you know how many Lexus you could buy for the money of one Maserati? So what happened was they shifted a shelf on me, and the shelf they went from, I said luxury, but they interpreted it as exotics, because the first two cars I mentioned are exotics. So as a person who is focused on the brand, I have to say to myself, what shelf are they on? They were on the exotic shelf, and they shifted to a luxury shelf. I have to be smart enough to see that coming. I want every one of you to recognize you have competition, but no one, not one of your customers, looks at it beyond 3 competitors. You are one of 3 or fewer in everything you do. The goal is to be number 1 on somebody's shelf. If you're a small business, you want to be number 1 on someone's shelf. I need to look at this because I created this one just for you guys. Normally I've got this stuff memorized. But this is what a brand is. You have to be able to leap into something significant. And that's what this is really about. It has to have real meaning. You have to be able to create a tribe. These are the people who care about you, and they are committed to you and committed to what your brand represents. And if, in fact, you have a tribe, they're not likely to go away. And the pandemic proved that a lot of us don't have tribes. We had some customers, but they went elsewhere. Tribes don't go away. You have to create a space in the mind. I can't say this enough. That's what a brand really is. It occupies the space in the mind of a customer. Forget all this nonsense that you've heard that marketing is a brand. It is not. Marketing is an expression of your brand. It is not your brand. Marketing people who say they are branders are not necessarily always that. Some are. I don't want to disparage people. What I'm saying is that people who create logos, people who create brochures, people who create ads, they're marketing people. That does not make them brand people. Their job is to interpret the brand. And this is the key to it. Every brand has to be experiential. It is not what you say, it is what you do. You create an experience for someone, and that is your brand. Now, I'm going to share a lot of things with you. Some of it's rapid fire, some lists as well. I've got a list of what I consider to be the top 3 takeaways today, things that if you don't remember anything else, hold on to these 3. At the end, I've got a list of 10 things I want you to pay attention to. But remember what I said earlier, we typically don't have a list of more than 3. We just can't do it. So my point is that when we get to the list of 10, it's nice to have that list, but you probably won't even remember 3 of them. But the key is that the 3 you remember are the ones you should be using. How many of you knew Father Ted Hesburgh at Notre Dame? Great human being. You can't blow an uncertain trumpet. So I would say to you, be very, very certain about what your trumpet is. Know it. Feel free to blow that trumpet. Let people know about it, but also keep in mind that to do that, you have to have a plan. If you don't have a brand plan, then you are just moving from customer to customer. A brand is about the essence of who you really, truly are, and it is about your values. And I'm going to show you how you create that shortly. Oh, there's a piece on there about budget as well. And if you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to address that near the end. How do you set a budget? And what is an appropriate budget? We can talk about that in the question and answer period if you like. I wanted you to meet these friends of mine. This is Mike and Becky Hogan. They used to be neighbors of mine. They were working in their basement. They have a cloud computing business that they started together, working out of their basement. And I had office space. I had a lot of it. I work alone. But I really loved this space because I had a giant office that was on an 800-foot deck with a stream that went through it. And deer used to come right up to my door. And I loved that space. I felt I could be so productive in it that I took the entire floor of the building to do it. But I didn't have anybody occupying the rest of the floor. So I asked them if they would like to rent a couple of offices, and they did. And eventually, they kept renting more and more and more and almost squeezed me out of my own space. And in the process, they finally said, we're going to get our own space because their business took off. And the reason their business took off is because and they would vouch for this. Mike came to me one day and he said, I listen to what you tell people about brand, and I don't think we have a brand. I think we just sell cloud computing. Could you help us create a brand? And so we did, and we tagged it Impact Technology. And then we spent all of our time defining what it means to create impact with technology. And in that process, they built a company together. They moved out of my building. They bought 2 buildings that were side by side, 2 brand new office buildings, and they asked me if I would like to move into their building. And they built a bridge between the 2 of them so we could get back and forth easily. And they gave me the entire floor of the second building because they knew I didn't want any employees. Here's the rest of the story. They operate in 5 states. They have 150 other employees. And they did exactly what they wanted to do. Remember I told you about a plan? They built their dream house in the Caribbean where they live full time. It is gorgeous. They love their lifestyle. And because they have a cloud computing business, they don't have to be stateside to do it. They're in the Virgin Islands, so they're still part of the US. But in fact, they are living the life they want. And they're relatively young, as you can tell by that picture. Have a plan, drive the dream. And the last piece that I will tell you about driving a dream is when I started this business 28 years ago, a guy called me, a friend of mine, and he said, Jim, you're starting a whole new business. I just left a big business that I hated. I had a lot of employees. I don't like being an employer. I wanted out. I sold to my partner. I said, I want to work alone. And he said to me, go out and buy something you really, really love. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, go get yourself something, because being an entrepreneur is really hard. So get something that's fun. So I went out and bought a pinball machine. And I have that pinball machine in my office, and I spend a great deal of time using it. I would urge each of you, if you have something that you enjoy, make it part of your business. Bring it in-house so that you can actually turn to it from time to time and say, I deserve this. Number 1 takeaway, tell better stories. That's what it comes down to. If you want a great brand, you need to learn to tell great stories. As you could tell, I started out this conversation telling stories. Some people think I'm an outstanding storyteller. Some people think I don't know when to shut up. I'm okay with that. I make a living helping people tell their story. And the key to a story, well, it's going to be the next takeaway. So before I get to it, I want to show you this. The Ryan Banks Academy is in Chicago. It was started by that woman that's in the picture. Her name is Valerie Groth. She's a protege of mine. Her family are friends. Her dad asked me if I could take her under my wing, and I did that about 8 years ago. Val was a teacher and a counselor in the Chicago Public Schools. And one of her students, 12-year-old Ryan Banks, somebody walked up, put a gun to his head, and blew his brains out on his way to school. It devastated her. She couldn't recover. She quit teaching. She decided to start a school, an urban school in Chicago, in the worst neighborhood, where these students could come and be with her all week so they are protected from the outside violent world. And then they can go home just on the weekends. And it is an experiential school, so they have lots of things for them to do that are beyond the normal school. So she started the Ryan Banks Academy. But she struggled. She didn't know how to raise money. She didn't know how to invite people into the process. And she asked me if I would help her do it. And she wrote this book. And the first time she showed me the book, I threw it away. And I said to her, it's all about you, Val. That's not a good book. Branding is always about them. It's never about us. You wrote about us. So she rewrote the book. And that's the book today. And she said, what do I do with it now that I wrote it? And I said, you get smart about the way you distribute it. We sent out 50 copies to people that we considered influencers. A guy by the last name of Griffin, who's in Chicago, he is the richest man in Chicago. He's worth about $8.5 billion, Ken Griffin, sent us a check for $50,000. All we did was send him the book with a note that said, would you take a moment and read this book? We sent the same book to the guy that founded TD Ameritrade. He sent us a check for $20,000. Those two guys know each other. They got together and said, hey, did you read this book? And they both had. And so then they invited Val to come to a meeting and ask her what she needed next. She said, I need $10 million to build my school. And they said, well, let's put a plan together to do that. And they offered her $2.5 million to get it started. We sent out 50 books. We got 50 responses. One of those responses was right here. That was last year. That was the Ellen show. And Val got invited to be on the show, and they gave her a check for $20,000. Here's the key. I said, Val, you've got to have a plan. When we met 8 years ago, you've got to have a plan. And if you're going to have a plan, you have to have an exit. So we wrote an exit strategy 8 years ago. And she no longer works for the Ryan Banks Academy. She was true to her exit. She now works for a company that sells PTSD cures. And I don't know if you've heard about this yet, but it's a phenomenal thing. If you know anybody that suffers from trauma, PTSD, they can give you 2 shots in your neck, and they can cure your PTSD with those 2 shots. Those 2 shots cost $3,000. Every other form of PTSD takes weeks and requires multiple sessions and costs about $20,000. Now, why do I tell you the detail about that company? Because that's who Val is. Val wasn't going to leave the school to go to some nothing job. She wanted to continue to create impact. She understands what it means to have a brand. And she wanted to help that brand grow because she thought it was meaningful. Have a purpose to your brand. Do something that changes the world. If you're not changing the world, why are you in business? Number 2 takeaway, I see me. It's always about them. It's never about us. Always about them. So you want to talk about your customer in a small business, not about what you do. Don't talk about what you do or how you do it. Talk about why you do it and for whom you do it, and always tell the customer's success story, not yours. Your business will grow. How do I know that? Because I had an agency in Chicago, and I think I told you how I disliked owning it. A woman had started it 17 years before I met her. She built it up to 17 employees and $3 million worth of business. 2 years later, we had 150 people, and we were doing $50 million worth of business. Because I convinced our employees to stop talking about what we do and start talking about the clients who benefit from it and how they benefit from it. We became Agency of the Year that year in Chicago because we focused on them, not on us. I want to show you another example because it's not just little companies. This is the National Museum of Health and Medicine. They're a client. They're a part of the Department of Defense. They're one of the tiniest museums in Washington, D.C. Has anybody in this room ever heard of them before? No. You don't need to. You don't need to. They invented body armor. They have the brain of Einstein in their collection. They have the bullet that killed Abraham Lincoln. They have all of his bloody clothes. They have the spine from John Wilkes Booth. And they direct all of the surgeries that go on in the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan over the previous years. They guided all of those surgeries long distance through video. Because if you're in Iraq and you're trying to help somebody who's lost all 4 of their limbs in an explosion, you are probably not qualified to do that. Because you are most likely somebody that is in the National Guard and is used to seeing bullet wounds in Naperville. But you get over there and it's different. So these folks are wired to the battlefields all over the world, and they direct the surgeries. They have 1,700 scientists and surgeons who work there. They are, in my opinion, a gift of this country unlike anything I've ever seen. And I was so proud to be able to work with them. And guess what? They have 25 million artifacts and relics in their collection, and Surgeon General decided to put them out of business in a consolidation. Shut them down and give all that stuff away or throw it away. So we had to come up with a strategy, a brand strategy that saved them, which we did. And they moved to Silver Spring. They're at Fort Detrick, and they are now one of the most popular museums in Washington, D.C., because it is a highly interactive museum. You can go in and watch the beautiful stuff they do because all their laboratories are in glass now. Only about 1% of the collection, the 25 million pieces, is actually on display, but they are always packed with people. And over the door, they have a sign that says, "I see me." The "I see me" that I described to you is a trademark that I placed 28 years ago for my company. I want my customers to always say, whatever I'm doing, it's so their customer says, "I see me." And the museum took it so seriously, they actually put it on the wall. That's the kind of stuff that I think you have to focus on. And why did I emphasize it with them? Because the first time I walked into the old museum at Walter Reed, I walked in with this sense of massive patriotism. Oh my God, what I can do. I never served in the military, but I can do something patriotic for my country by saving this museum. I had my 10-year-old son with me. And my son walked in, he didn't feel patriotic. He said, "Dad, look, they have babies in bottles." They have the world's largest collection of fetuses in every stage of growth, all lined up in bottles. And my son was fascinated by these babies in the bottles. And I said to myself, we have to create a museum where every person who walks through the door says, "I see me." Every helmet that's in the NFL came from the technology these people developed in creating a better military helmet. So every application has to be reconsidered. If you think you have a customer, their customer is largely the military. They were started during the Civil War, and their job was to help improve military medicine. That's why they exist. But my point is that that's what they thought their brand was, and now they supply technology to the NFL. I don't care what business you're in, you can always find another angle. Look for it. And if the pandemic didn't teach us anything, it should have taught us that we have to be diverse and we have to be able to pivot. If you can't pivot in a small business, you will die. Number 3 takeaway, market disruptive. Don't go into a market to be part of the herd. Figure out how you can be disruptive, and I'm going to show you some examples of disruption. I don't mean destructive, I don't mean it in any negative sense, but if you're going to be in a market, be different. Otherwise, you will struggle. Here's maybe my favorite example. Oops, sorry, we'll get caught up. Those are the 3 things you have to be disruptive. You have to be better, you have to be best, you have to be brightest. This is one of my favorite case studies. Cirque du Soleil. How many of you are familiar with Cirque du Soleil? Show of hands. Great. How many of you are familiar with Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey? More. And you know they're out of business, right? You know Barnum and Bailey went bankrupt. They're gone. That circus doesn't exist. This circus does. Why? And I use them as an example because they were one small, little, tiny performing group out of Montreal. And what you see on the screen right now are just a handful of the programs they run today. If you go to Las Vegas, you will see that they have 9 separate shows on the Las Vegas Strip alone. The same company doing 9 different shows right down the street from each other. They have traveling circuses that go all over the world. And yes, the pandemic slowed them down as well, but they're coming back. So why do I tell their story? Because they understood how to create a different kind of circus. And if you're going to do that, there's a really good book you might want to look at, and it's called Blue Ocean Strategy. Have any of you heard of it before? Get the book, but recognize, don't get the first edition. They were very wrong about that. It's a book that was written by a couple of Harvard professors, and they really missed the boat on the first book, and a lot of people who tried to use it failed. Get the second book. They've revised it, and they are much smarter in the second book. But they also feature this example. So what they talk about is if you have a brand, particularly if you're a small business, there's one of 4 things you can do. You can either look for something in the marketplace to eliminate to make your offering better. you can expand something, you can create something. What's the fourth? I'll get to it. I'll show you on the screen in a minute. But my point is, that's all you can do. 4 basic things, and then you're done. If you don't do those things, then you become a commodity. You're Me Too. But what did they do? They eliminated animals from the circus. Cirque du Soleil does not use animals. Now, let's talk about that. Because by taking animals out, not only did they save money, they don't have to pay for vets, they don't have to transport animals, they don't have to feed animals, they don't have to cage animals. They save all that money, which is the number one principle of any good business, is how can I do this, create greater value at lower price. That should be your mantra. I want greater value at lower price. And that's what this did. Get rid of all the animals, you can create greater value. And why did they also want to do that? Because most of the public didn't like having animals. They felt guilty about that. And they got wise to that and said, let's get the animals out so our customers don't feel guilty. Good move. One of the other things they did was they eliminated all of the things that were sold in the aisles. If you went to Barnum and Bailey, everything that was sold, and you can imagine cotton candy and glow-in-the-dark necklaces and all kinds of nonsense were sold in the aisles, and the public hated that because the kids are always screaming, give me this, give me that. They sell nothing in the aisles. But to get in and out of their facilities, you have to walk through their retail store. That retail store that you walk in and out of on the way into the performance generates 34% of their revenue. 34% of revenue comes from merchandise. Let's talk about tickets. Barnum and Bailey sold tickets for $7 and went bankrupt. These people average ticket price $135. And if you want to see a show on the Vegas Strip, it's as high as $210 a seat. And how did they do it? I want you to latch onto this, because this was one little circus in Montreal that has grown into this international behemoth. And they did it because they understood that they had to compete with something other than a circus. They became disruptive. And what they decided they wanted to be was a competitor to live theater. So they don't have a ringmaster, they have a narrator. And they tell a story. Every single show that they do is themed. It's a wonderful story, and the narrator takes you through it. And the acts only play out the story. They're not just there tumbling for your enjoyment. They're part of the actual story. And here's the key to what they do. They always take someone out of the audience and put them in the show. Literally, they will pull someone out of a seat and put them in the show, and they have a really significant role in every show. What does that say to you? I see me. If they took you and put you in their show, everybody in this room would say, that could be me. And they begin to relate to your experience. Branding is about experience, not about messaging. I wanted to show you this. ACCO was a client. They make swing line staplers. I would bet almost every one of you, if you've ever had a stapler, have had a black swing line stapler. They sell for about $4, maybe $5. I don't know what they are today. They make staplers. You see that one in the middle down there? That's a swing line stapler. And the first time I saw it, I said, wow, I really like that. I want one of those. What is it? I knew I liked it before I even knew what it was. And I was so carried away with that sentiment that we put them in boxes, and we put that very sentiment on the boxes. And if you lift the lid on the one on the right, when you lift that curtain, it has a chip inside the box, and it plays a fanfare. It plays dun da da dun da da, and it reveals the stapler. That's all you get. We had 500 of them. We sent them out to people who we thought were influencers. David Letterman used it. Ellen DeGeneres used it. Regis Philbin used it. And on and on and on. It's been featured 5 separate times in the New York Times newspaper. And here was the key. We never talked about it as a stapler. It's a fashion statement. Put it on your desk and make a statement. It cost $25. We sold out the entire year's production, and we did nothing more than what I've just described to you. Put it in the hands of people of influence, let them play with it, and they didn't treat it like a stapler. They were having fun with it. Regis kept knocking it off the desk, watching it bounce on the floor, picking it up, knocking it off again. But it got attention, and we sold out an entire production run with it. And we didn't have to do anything in advertising other than send it to people who we thought would treat it like a fashion statement. I want you to use your imagination. That's what this is about. They had a lot of money. They could have afforded a major ad campaign. We chose not to do it. We chose to be effective rather than just spend money. This is a baby of mine, Chicago Sinfonietta. Have anybody heard of it before? It is in Chicago, of course. We started this orchestra 35 years ago. I'd never been to a symphony concert in my life. I don't know my elbow from an oboe. I know nothing about music, but I knew I could take what I knew about a brand and I could create a powerful company out of it. And I wanted to do it in an industry where people would say, that's a dying industry. Who cares about symphonies anymore? When we started it 35 years ago, there were 18 symphony orchestras in Chicago. There are 6 now, and we're one of them. And we make money, and we thrive. And one of the first things I ever said to the board, they elected me chairman of the board, and I said to them, you know, I've never been in music before. I didn't realize all you people think you're supposed to suffer for your art. I don't suffer for anybody. We're making money. And we have ever since. And my point to you is it is the most unusual orchestra you will ever hear. And the way I can describe that to you is we toured in Germany, and one of the newspapers said, they are the second great orchestra of Chicago. We all know who the first one is. Chicago Symphony is phenomenal. We're the second great one. And I'm okay with that. I don't need to be number one. But I need to be number one with my customers. And we sell out every single performance, even though you've never heard of us. You're not my audience. I don't need to talk to you. I need to talk to people who will come to that orchestra event. And when they walk out, here's what the Chicago Tribune said. Walking out of most symphony orchestra performances is the equivalent of walking out of church. It's a solemn, quiet, slow process. You walk out with your head down, you've been enjoying the music, but you're quiet. You walk out of a Chicago Sinfonietta concert, and it's like you've just seen a Star Wars movie. People are energized, they're excited, and they're talking to each other, people they don't even know. That's what we wanted to create. And the reason we created it was because I decided to do something different. That orchestra was the first orchestra in America that had 50% of its musicians as women. It was unheard of in the 80s. A third of our musicians were musicians of color. Nobody did that. There wasn't an orchestra in America that put colored folks in the seats. And I did it because I wanted an orchestra that looked like the community we serve. We serve the city of Chicago. So when you look out into the audience in any of our concerts, you will see a cross-section. Unlike some other orchestras where they have what I refer to as the blue-haired ladies. The old blue-haired ladies with their sweaters pinned to their seats so they don't fall asleep. That's what most orchestras are, not this one. I want you to know I had my own exit plan. I walked out on the 15th anniversary. And I said, I'm not coming back. If this baby can't walk, then it has no business being around. If you're going to be a small business, and we were, I said, all I can do is help you get your footing, grow, and then I got to get out of the way because there's somebody better who can run this better than I can. And you have to be willing to address that every business has a life cycle, yours included. If all you want is a lifestyle business, you don't really have a business. And I know a lot of people who do that. A friend of mine helps people exit, financial exits. And what happens is people wait too long. So somebody will say, well, I'm going to work for another 5 years. And then they get cancer. And now their company is not worth a fraction of what it was because the purchaser knows that the person who started and ran the business isn't going to be around to help out anymore. So now instead of the $80 million they thought their business was worth, it's 20. Have an exit strategy, people. Even if you don't intend to fully leave, know when your small business needs to advance in someone else's hands. That line up at the top is critical. So often, we just want people to know who we are as a small business. Don't ever confuse awareness with affinity. A guy asked me yesterday, I've been on the tour doing workshops. I did a 3-day workshop for a client this week. And he asked me, what does affinity mean? It is a passion to be associated with you. They have a passion to be associated with you. Don't ever confuse awareness with that passion. It is not important to have people aware of you. It's only important that they act on it. And lots of people, particularly marketing people, think that your success comes from more people knowing about you. It only comes from the right people doing business with you. It does not come from people knowing about you. Just like the Sinfonietta. You don't know them. They do really, really well. I wanted to talk a moment about social media. It's going to be relatively brief because I don't want to spend a lot of time on marketing. But I want to say to you that people used to think that the bigger you were, the louder or bigger the microphone or megaphone you had. That's not true anymore. Everybody's got a voice now because of social media. Be aware of that. Embrace that. Encourage your people that work for you and encourage your customers to use that voice on your behalf. Let them tell your story, you tell their story. That's the secret to social media. If you use social media because you think it's an electronic brochure and that's how you're running your website, is let's tell them everything we can about us so they want to do business with us. It's not going to work, folks, because there are other people who can tell better stories. It's not about you, it's always about them. The next item you're going to see is brand ARC. ARC, it stands for authentic, relevant, and consistent. It's actually a product that I sell. I've trademarked that. It's a survey that I do among my clients' customers. And I go in and talk to their customers one-on-one to find out how they view my customers or my client's brand. And it's not a customer satisfaction survey. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what do you think of the brand. You remember the Hogans that I talked about earlier? They had that cloud computing business. They did a deal with a university, and they were paid $10 million to do a cloud computing project with the university. And when I went in and I asked the client what they thought of that brand, they used a really, really unflattering term that had chicken something in it. And I said, really? You call them that? He said, I think that's what their brand is. I said, were you unhappy with them? He said, oh no, they did great work. The salespeople were fantastic. The engineers that came in, they did a great job. It was all fantastic. However, they left $3 million on the table. And I gave that to other people because they don't have a good CRM program and their people weren't talking to each other. If you have salespeople and you have other people in the system, whether they're customer service or whatnot, make sure they are communicating with each other. These are tools that I use to help people identify brands. This is just called a matrix that we use. It's called forced paired comparison. You take values that you think important and you compare them one-to-one. There are a lot of tools. I use Color My World. I literally hand out crayons and construction paper and have people answer 3 critical questions. Those questions change from client to client, but there are many ways to find out what a brand is really about. This is the blue ocean that I talked about earlier. This is the first edition. As I said, I'd get the second edition. And you can see on it that there are things you can do. You can eliminate, you can reduce, you can raise, you can create. These are the 4 basics of brand hierarchy. You have to have clear values. You have to have a brand vision, a brand mission, and a brand positioning. And I'm going to rattle those off really quickly. Your values. I am a Boy Scout, right? Because I am trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. I'm a Boy Scout. Don't use moral values when you're trying to describe your company values. Nobody cares that you're honest. Have you ever met anybody that said, I'm not trustworthy, but do business with me? Don't use moral values. Use work ethics and use practical, functional terms. Does that make sense to you? So who's got a value that you can relate to? What is the core value? The single core value of Disney? Anybody? Imagination. Everything they do at Disney has to express imagination. That is their core value. What is the core value of Starbucks? Self-indulgence. They give you permission to be self-indulgent. And I can go on all day. Find true work values, skip the moral values. This is a brand vision. It has to be aspirational and unachievable. If you're doing a vision and you can finish it, it's not a vision, it's a mission. What is the vision of the March of Dimes? I wrote it, I know it. Every child is born perfectly healthy. That is their mission or their vision. It's impossible, but it's desirable. It's aspirational. Every vision statement has to be unattainable. A mission? You can read that for yourself. It's really important that you get to the why, but first, in a handful of words, you have to be able to tell somebody what you do. And if you do it correctly, they're going to say, tell me more. If they don't, if they just nod politely, you're not doing a good job of describing your mission. And this is the bread and butter in my business, because people don't really know how to do this without help. And this is positioning. And this is all about how do you differentiate yourself from all of your competition. That's critical. So I'm going to give you an example of what that means. In Nike, the shoe company, their positioning is they are the only athletic company in the world that helps you achieve your personal victory. I don't know if that means anything to you, but it sure works for them. That company started in the trunk of a car. They then had one retail store for many years. So if you think that you aren't Nike and this isn't relevant, then you don't have a vision. Because when they started that company, they knew they were going to be something special. And they knew they were going to grow. And they didn't have big backing. The guy kept the shoes in his mother's dining room. And they built this company. There are 4 basic types. Well, let's get through that. Those are the 3 basic elements of a brand. You have to be differentiated, you have to be unique, and you have to have a narrow target audience. By narrow, I'm going to give you the March of Dimes example again, and the board of directors fought me on this. Everybody wants healthy babies, right? We all want healthy babies, but that doesn't make us the target audience. What makes us the target audience is, can we have a healthy baby? So let's assume that men can't have babies. They can be fathers, but they can't have babies. So that's half the U.S. population gone. They're not your target audience. Excuse me. About half the women in America are not of childbearing age. So they're off the list. And then you look at the other half of the women who are on the list, and many of them do not deliberately have babies. Half the babies born in America are unplanned. So we are talking about less than 25% of all women in America who are actually the target audience. So let's just talk to those women. That's what we did. We focused on let's talk to women who can have healthy babies. But I don't want you to lose sight of the fact that there are grandparents, there are fathers, there are legislatures that have to pay for health care. And what we do is we build concentric circles out from those healthy women who want to have healthy babies, and we talk to those other audiences through the eyes of the mother. We don't speak to the dad and say, hey, have a healthy baby. We say, don't smoke in front of the woman who's going to have your baby. Don't drink with her, because that's not going to give you a healthy baby. Now you get to see these 4 types. You can read those for yourself. They're pretty straightforward. You can be innovative, you can be incremental, you can be substantial, or you can be transformative. They are all equally worthy. Pick one or more and make that your company from the ground up, day one. Now I'm going to go through these relatively quickly for you. These are 10 paths to distinction. And you guys can you'll see this online if you want to, you don't have to write them down. There's 10 of them. It's always about who, Who's it about? Okay, who's it not about? Multi-directional, that gets you back to social media, and what I'm really getting at is, if all you're doing is thinking you need to talk to the audience, then you're making a mistake. You have to create environments where you can go back and forth. You have to be able to create an exchange with the customers on every single level. Not just tell them something and hope they parrot it back to you, but ask more than you tell. The F factor. You can read that as well. Family, friends, following, that's all critical these days. And most of it comes through social media, but it comes through word of mouth. Lots and lots of companies excel because of word of mouth. I've been in business 28 years here. I don't do any marketing. I work every single day of the year if I want. It's all word of mouth. I don't do proposals. I don't have to. People come to me and say, we want to work with you. Okay. And then they'll say, where do you want to start? And then I'll put a plan together with them. But I don't have to sell them on it. My point to you is, after a while, word of mouth can do an awful lot for you. Always exponential as opposed to incremental. If you're looking to grow your business by 5%, you could just as easily lose it by 5%. Look to go big or go home. Grow your business in big pieces. Have a plan that is as narrow as possible, like the moms that I talked about. Focus on the thriving. You don't want as many customers as you can get. You want as many thriving customers as you can get, because that's where the money is. Figure out how to help people thrive, and you can work with half as many customers, because they will pay more for the privilege. Cultivate your own culture. Have one. What does it mean to have a culture? It is not merely you telling people how you want them to perform. It's about getting them to perform in ways they wish to. I'm going to give you one quick example about it. In a big company that I had that I didn't enjoy, we did a program called On My Own Time. We had 150 people, and we would say to them, come in tomorrow or next week or next month, whenever we have it planned, and show us something you do on your own time that really matters to you, that is outside of work. And they came in and they showed us what really mattered to them. And then we found ways to get invested in the things they did. Now, some of them did pottery, some of them built canoes, one of them was in dirt biking, but we asked them to show us who they really were. And that makes a difference because it contributes to a culture. Seek engagement. Be marketplace disruptive. And what do you want to do? Tell better stories so they say what? That's the list all over again. Thank you.
Come on, give Jim a really good round of applause. Come on. We have a few minutes for Q&A. If there's anybody who has a question they would like to ask, Ken Bartels is going to help share that. Because of the TV coverage, we need to make sure the question actually gets repeated up here. So does anybody have a question? Good, way to be right next to Ken.
What is your ARC stand for? Your acronym, I'm sorry, I missed it.
I believe she was asking what the ASC,
ARC,
the ARC stood for.
Authentic, relevant, and consistent. If you want to have a brand, you have to be those three things. You have to be authentic, you have to be relevant, and you have to be consistent.
Questions? Anybody?
I'll give you one that I thought somebody would ask, and that's, how do I set my budget? Your marketing budget is typically anywhere from 3 to 8% on average, or should be. In some businesses, it's as high as 25%, depending on your margins. But I would say to you that if you're spending 3 to 8% on marketing, you better be spending a third of that on real brand development and not just on messaging. By show of hands, who spends between 3 and 8% on marketing? How much do you spend? 1%? Those who spend less than 3% on marketing, raise your hand. Those who spend more than 8%, raise your hand. Those who spend more than 15%, raise your hand. Yeah, you really, for most businesses, you want to be in the 3 to 8%.
Okay, if that's it, please give Jim a final round of applause. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We're going to be able to share the video and the PowerPoint presentation. So there's a lot going out there. All the chambers that participated will be getting that sent to them. In addition, I want to personally thank the vendors who came out today to work the exhibitor tables. We have photos of all of you, and we'll be forwarding those on as well to your chamber to share with your chamber members and with you. And last but not least, again, I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Community Bank of Elmhurst. Give Community Bank a great round of applause for putting this together. We had hoped to have Jim out here 4 years ago, and then something came up, and we weren't allowed to gather in person, and so it got delayed a little bit. But we never lost sight of wanting to get this done, and we're happy to have gotten it done. And I thank my fellow West Suburban Chamber of Commerce executives who participated, and I thank their members for joining us here today. Thank you. Have a great rest of the fall.